A cold Pacific morning, a stone storehouse exhales dry air through its vents. Inside, baskets of maize and chuño, bolts of patterned cloth, repair cord coiled like sleeping snakes. At the threshold, a quipu hangs from an official's hand, yellow for grain, red for textiles, brown for tools, knots placed in tens and hundreds. Behind him, the Chapac Ñan descends from the Cordillera, a 30,000-kilometer lattice of steps, bridges, and tamped earth, stitched with tambos that ration rest and time. Llamas shuffle in, each bearing a measured load. Nothing here is heroic. Everything is counted. Now turn carefully to the shore. No new technology. No wide oceans. Only the system the Inca already trust, extended one notch outward. Coastal mariners, Chincha, Manteño, entered into seasonal mita, their rafts trimmed with cotton sails and leeboards they already know. Culca moved to the harbors, Tumbes, Guayaquil, Esmeraldas, Tumaco, so inland rations meet the tide on a schedule, not a wish. Ports governed by tribute and audit rather than conquest. Dried fish for highland cloth, spondylus shells for tools, hardwood planks for protection that actually arrives, each promise tied to a cord, each cord read aloud. The south remains a frontier at Mall. Forest and river forbid overreach. The north stays honest before the Darien, swamp and fever, and fantasies of a road. Between these limits, power does not sprawl. It endures. The road touches the sea in short, repeatable motions. The ledger replaces the spear where it can. Ritual days double as inventory days, so memory survives the wind. This is the counterfactual. 3 disciplined fixes to logistics, storage, and edge rule. Nothing more. Allow a modest reach beyond South America without breaking the math that keeps the heartland fed. If you value rigorous, no-hype alternate history, subscribe to What If Wars. Southward, the road meets a living frontier. The Mall River runs cold and brown between terraces of forest, and the land beyond belongs to people who know how to break an army into tired pieces. Mapuche war bands do not hold still for parade. They pull men from scattered Rihu communities, strike across rivers at fords they have cut and memorized, and vanish into timber where slings, lances, and arrows turn every approach into a wound. Here, every kilometer of road costs a month of labor to keep passable. Bridges need planks replaced after each flood. Culverts clog with winter debris. Garrisons beg for fresh rations faster than llama trains can arrive. A storehouse at the last secure tambo can hold 3 months of maize and chuño at projected consumption. But the moment patrols double their range, that buffer collapses to 6 weeks. The arithmetic says, hold the line. Watchtowers spaced by sight. Relay fires on ridgetops. Patrol circuits no longer than 5 days out and back. Garrisons capped at what the nearest valley can feed without drawing down next year's seed. The frontier becomes a ledger of limits, necessary, respected, and stable. Northward, the map pretends a path until the land refuses the pretense. The Darien is not an obstacle you muscle through. It is a climate that eats decisions. Humidity swells pack cords until knots slip. Leather rots. Sandals rasp to nothing in a week. Porters carry more water than cargo, and every day adds a ration that must be carried by the ration itself. Malaria and fevers bleed the convoy in silence. A quipu that begins with proud numbers, 200 porters, 60 llamas, shrinks by honest knots until the column is only a rumor of itself. Here the only rational choice is to skip the green teeth with water under the keel. The reach north must be maritime. The empire's shape must change from blanket to chain. With those borders accepted, the state's reach becomes a practice, not a boast. Coastal skill becomes public duty without changing its tools. Households along Peru's and Ecuador's shores already raise men who trim cotton sails and handle leeboards by feel. The empire names that skill, schedules it, and pays it through the maita. Crews rotate in seasons matched to wind and swell. A coastal headman produces 40 sailors for 6 weeks, registered on a cord whose colors and knot positions mirror those used inland. White for people, red for textiles to be paid, yellow for rations issued, brown for tools dispensed and returned. Training is standardization rather than invention. The same 3 reefing knots, the same signal for a sudden squall, the same rule that no raft pushes past a known inlet after the 3rd hour of afternoon wind. Risks remain, but they become predictable enough to ensure with extra rations and spare pins carried as part of the manifest. The storehouse logic, proven in the hills, moves to the harbors. Site selection follows the same dry air, high ground rule, above floodline, oriented to prevailing breeze, with vents that carry off moisture. Tumbes receives a double row of circular bins raised on stone plinths. Guayaquil's muddy margins demand rectangular elevated floors. Esmeraldas and Tumaco add wide eaves for the rains. Each node carries a standard stock: maize flour in 30-kilogram baskets, chuño in coarse sacks, salt in clay jars, coils of cordage, spare sailcloth, wooden pins and wedges sorted by length, 30 bolts of high-status cloth stamped with a sunburst pattern unique to that storehouse. Inventory turns by quarter. A quipu for each harbor uses 5 pendant groups: time, place, goods out, goods in, losses. So an arriving official can match cords by sight and settle discrepancies in minutes instead of hours. Rule at the edge narrows to places, not vast zones. Instead of annexation, the state offers port protectorates, agreements counted as much as sworn. At Guayaquil, the pledge is concrete. A quarter year yields 100 baskets of dried fish, 20 measures of salt, and 18 bolts of local cotton cloth. The empire delivers 30 bolts of highland textiles and a chest of bronze chisels and knives. At Manabi, the ledger lists spondylus shells in baskets weighted and checked before elders. In return come food in lean months and garments that mark participants as linked to the sun. At Tumaco, tribute shifts toward hardwood planks and a promise of canoe builders for pier repairs next season. Garrisons remain small, 20 to 40 men, and officials rotate after 4 or 6 months. On handover days, cords are compared aloud, shortages named and explained, and replacements sealed with gifts rather than fines when the explanation matches weather and witness. Predictability lowers the temperature of fear. People plan for the next quarter because the last was counted fairly. The corridor north reads like a set of measured breaths. Tums to the Gulf of Guayaquil is 200 to 300 kilometers by cautious nearshore legs. With an average of 2 knots, 10 hours a day, and a rest day folded in for repairs, the leg takes 4 to 6 days. Rations are calculated at 1.5 baskets per man per day to cover heavier work at landfall. Water jars are replenished at river mouths, mapped and memorized. Guayaquil to the Manabi coast runs another 200 kilometers, the swell steeper, but the coastline honest. 4 to 5 days suffice if departure waits for a morning of offshore breeze. Manabi to Esmeraldas or Tumaco adds 200 to 250 kilometers. Slower water inside mangrove channels, offset by shelter that makes landfall safer in sudden squalls. The last approach toward the Gulf of Urabá stops on the Dariene's doorstep. No overland push follows. The relationship there is a light tie, a ceremonial exchange each year, tools for information, presents for peace. At each bead on this string, the give and take is spelled out in quantities that matter to lives. Tumbes issues 5 metric tons of maize flour and chuño per rotation, and expects 3% loss to spoilage and weather. Guayaquil answers with fish and salt measured to the basket, and the shortfall of 2 baskets after a storm is marked, not hidden. Manabi's divers deliver shells in lots whose weight is checked before elders. A surplus beyond the pledge is purchased at a known rate, teaching profit without smuggling. Tumaco's carpenters log labor days promised for pier repair and receive tools whose return is tied to an inventory festival where worship and counting share a calendar so memory stays public. If you are satisfied with this section, I will continue with a narrated campaign season, the audit logic of maritime quipu, the religious political glue at harbors, the shock of epidemic and the system's resilience, and the closing synthesis. Month 1 begins at Tumbes with the tide still low. The storehouse doors open to the cool. A clerk runs fingers across a quipu, cruise, cargo, calendar. 40 sailors answer their names. 2 rafts are inspected. balsa logs tight, sail seams sound, lee boards free. Llama convoys unload 5 metric tons of maize flour and chuño. Half goes to sea, half stays against lean days. Payment is counted in cloth. 30 bolts with a sunburst pattern, specific to Tumbes, proof of service that any garrison will honor. The first leg runs north along a pale line of breakers. Average speed holds near 2 knots. The crew works in silence, broken by short commands. At dusk, the rafts ground in a sheltered pocket. Rations are measured by habit. Maize porridge thickened with salt fish, water from a jar that carries a red knot for 2 days remaining. Sleep is shallow. Men wake at the creak of cordage and the slap of a seal near shore. On day 4, Guayaquil's brown water and mangroves rise ahead. The receiving clerk cross-checks knots. 2 baskets are damp and discarded. The loss is recorded aloud so memory will not turn to rumor. Tribute is presented, dried fish, salt, cotton cloth, and returned with Highland textiles and bronze chisels. One dispute over the weight of a basket ends not with a fine, but with an exchange of 2 bolts now for 2 baskets next quarter. The ledger prefers relationships that repeat. Departure waits for a morning breeze. The leg to Manabí is shorter on the map and harder in the body. The swell is steeper, a spar complains, and is replaced with a pin from the repair chest. The used pin is set aside to be replaced on return. Divers in Manabí present spondylus in measured baskets before elders. A small surplus appears. It is not seized. It is purchased at a rate announced in the courtyard, so that the next surplus will come to the storehouse first, rather than slip away at night. Esmeraldas and Tumaco bring mangroves again. A local pilot steps aboard for the channels. A squall hammers the sails and pushes one raft onto a sandbar. No man is lost. 1 sack of maize spoils. The shortfall is spoken, not hidden. At Tumaco, tribute becomes labor promises for pier repair next season, logged with knots that signify days of work owed by named households. Tools are issued. Dates are tied to festival days so that memory has a place to stand. The Gulf of Urubá sits at the edge of sense. The rafts do not force the Darien. A headman is greeted. Gifts are exchanged. News is gathered. Currents shifted. A fever inland. A rival quarreling with a cousin. The return begins early. Each node is visited in reverse. Repair items are replaced. Agreements are reread. By the time Tumbes comes into view, the season shows its shape in numbers. Cargo losses at 2%. 1 broken spar. 1 crewman released to overland travel with a fever and received home by a garrison on the road. The cords from Tumbes and the traveler's quipu match within expected variance. A clean reconciliation becomes the story people tell. Audit is a ritual of detail. A maritime quipu hangs heavier than an agricultural ledger. The main cord carries 5 pendant groups: time, place, goods out, goods in, variance. Colors assign themselves by habit: yellow for maize, white for salt and fish, red for textiles paid out, purple for shells, brown for tools and repairs. Quantities sit in the same decimal places as inland cords, so any trained keeper can read them. Causes of variance have their own small knots: a slip for spoilage, a twist for weather delay, a loop for exchange. Each harbor keeps a twin cord. On handover day, cords are compared in public. If numbers disagree beyond a narrow band, the dispute is heard at once, with witnesses called and baskets brought for a second weighing. Honesty is rewarded with predictability. Officials who report true losses keep their posts. Headmen who present full tribute receive next quarter's textiles without insult. The system lives or dies by whether people believe that numbers will be heard. Belief is anchored to place. Near each harbor stands a small sun shrine. It does not erase local gods. It stands beside them. 4 times a year, offerings and inventories coincide. People gather at noon. Elders present the tribute, and the storehouse doors open. The quipu keeper names what goes in and what goes out while singers keep time. When the last knot is tied, food is shared, and disputes are eased with gifts that were already budgeted. Children watch as rations move from storage to hands. Authority becomes a calendar, not a threat. Absence is noticed without violence. Presence is rewarded without flattery. When the old world sickness arrives, the cords tighten. A keeper dies, and a gap appears where a skilled hand once stood. Crews thin, harvests slip. The buffer in the storehouse buys time, measured in weeks and sometimes months. Rotations shorten so more households carry lighter loads. Officials are replaced faster. Apprentices step up to read chords that used to be above their station. Tribute schedules stretch without breaking. A quarter becomes a season. A missed basket becomes an agreed deferral. Some nodes fail, others hold. The aim is not invulnerability. It is a floor no family falls through at once. Where the ledger survives, fear does not metastasize into flight. The lessons accumulate. Power that reaches too far collapses under its own appetite. Power that counts honestly survives hunger and rumor. A port protectorate that knows its do's and dates will prefer a distant empire that keeps its word to a neighbor who keeps his spear close. Storehouses that breathe and cords that agree bind strangers into a schedule. The South remains a watchline at Mall because the forest demands it. The North remains modular before the Darien because the swamp commands it. Between these edges, the road touches the sea without pretending to own it. What endures is a chain of places: Tumbas, Guayaquil, Manabí, Esmeraldas, Tumaco, each close enough to feed the next, each confident that a shortfall will be heard and a surplus will be bought. What endures is a habit of rotation that treats sailors like road crews and audits like festivals. What endures is a state that prefers coordination to conquest and numbers to noise. The map does not swell, it steadies. And in that steadiness, an empire learns to last. Year by year, the chain takes shape. In the last decade of the 15th century, trials begin close to home. Tumbes becomes a hinge between valley and tide. 2 coastal storehouses are built above floodlines, their vents set to the prevailing breeze. A first season fields 60 sailors in rotation. 2 rafts per leg, 1 metric ton per raft. Average losses sit at 4%. Audits hurt to hear. They are kept public. The next season brings the loss rate down by 1 knot on the cord labeled spoilage, not by punishment, but by adding spare sailcloth and a second water jar per crew. By the first years of the 16th century, Guayaquil enters the ledger. The pledge is precise. Each quarter, 100 baskets of dried fish and 20 of salt. In return, 30 bolts of Highland cloth and a chest of bronze chisels. The garrison is capped at 30 men, their rations drawn locally, so llama traffic does not starve the valley. A pier is reinforced with hardwood that Tumaco later agrees to supply. Auditor rotations move from annual to semi-annual to limit friendships that blur numbers. Between 1506 and 1515, the Manabí coast is tied in. Spondylus shells arrive in baskets weighed before elders. A rule takes hold. Surplus above the pledge is bought at a posted rate, not seized. The psychology shifts. Men who dive deep bring their best to the courtyard rather than hide it in creeks. Repairs and cordage form a second tier of tribute that keeps rafts alive. The Coastal Transport Corps standardizes 3 reefing knots and 1 danger signal, so crews can read each other at a distance without shouting over wind. Esmeraldas and Tumaco follow. Mangrove water is patient. So is policy. Tribute becomes hybrid. Materials plus labor days pledged for pier work and channel clearing. A calendar pairs festivals with inventory, so memory is pinned to song as much as to knots. Headmen accept rotation clauses, 4 or 6-month tours for imperial officials, audits at handover, public readings before offerings. When a shortfall appears, the question is not, whom do we accuse, but where did the weather break the plan, and what buffer absorbs it next quarter? By 1516-1523, the numbers show a living system. Average nearshore speed holds near 2 knots. Safe days on water per season rise from 40 to 50 as crews learn winds and coves. Tumbes issues roughly 5 metric tons of rations per rotation. Guayaquil returns fish and salt that cover coastal garrisons without pulling grain from the highlands. A typical llama convoy, 100 beasts, delivers 3.5 tons from valley to harbor in a week when the pass is dry, less when snow lingers. The schedule is adjusted, not ignored. Audit discrepancies narrow to within 2% on most cords. When a clerk dies, his apprentice reads the cord well enough to be believed. The Darien remains a stop line. The headman on the Gulf's eastern lip meets once a year. Gifts move both ways. No road is attempted. The jungle is treated as a fact, not an opponent. In the south, Maul stays a ledger of limits. Patrol circuits capped at 5 days out and back. Watchtowers placed by line of sight rather than ambition. Garrisons sized to what nearby terraces can feed, without touching seed stock. The Empire learns to admire its own restraint. The human view stays close. A runner in the highlands carries a message stitched into quipu knots. 2 rafts due in 3 days, 1 repair pin consumed, request replacement. He hands the cord to a coastal clerk, who reads it aloud so bystanders hear promise and need in the same breath. A pilot watches foam lines on brown river mouths and calls the turn that saves a load. A headman weighs a basket and refuses to round up or down. Men trust the system because the system expects them to tell the truth and pays them on time. The sickness years arrive, and the chain bends but does not break. A storehouse that kept 3 months of rations now carries families through 2 bad harvests without panic. Tribute schedules slip from quarter to season and back again as villages bury and count and speak their losses in public without shame. The best compliment the cords receive is simple: they match. When a cord from a harbor and a cord from an official tell the same story, within the same narrow variance, rumor has no air to breathe. From this, lessons are plain. Distance is not conquered, it is budgeted. Authority that audits itself is stronger than authority that shouts. The road is a promise only when it meets a storehouse that breathes and a harbor that pays. The sea is not an empire's stage. It is a short bridge between 2 places that already keep their word. What remains on the map is a chain you can name without looking. Tumbes, Guayaquil, Manabí, Esmeraldas, Tumaco. Between them, legs measured in days, not dreams. Behind them, valleys that feed storehouses, that feed crews who return on time. At their southern and northern edges, frontiers that are honored as facts, Maul and the Darien, so the middle can live. The empire does not grow wide, it grows reliable, and in reliability it finds the only expansion that lasts, a broader circle of places where people expect tomorrow to look like the best parts of today. In ordinary years, numbers settle into habits that people can feel in their hands. A tambo on forgiving ground sits about a day's walk from the next, 20 to 30 kilometers when the path is wide and the slope friendly, closer where cliffs and rivers compress the road. A coastal storehouse above Tumbes holds roughly 60 to 80 metric tons when full. Maize flour in 30-kilogram baskets stacked 6 high, chuño in coarse sacks, salt in jars sealed with fiber stoppers, 30 bolts of cloth per shelf in a cool chamber under lock. Turnover steadies at 1 full rotation each quarter in quiet times, 2 in campaign months when crews and garrisons draw heavily. Llama convoys arrive in strings of 100, each animal carrying 30 to 40 kilograms. 3.5 tons enter the ledger per convoy after counting the fodder eaten on the way. A pass under snow cuts that figure. The cord reflects the cut without shame. Garrisons in the port protectorates remain small by design. At Guayaquil, 30 men, 10 to patrol piers and paths, 10 to escort auditors during handovers, 10 in reserve for river fords when the tide surprises a caravan. The head count fits what the local tribute feeds without touching next season's seed stock. At Tumaco, 20 men suffice because mangrove channels slow trouble more reliably than walls. Their rations draw from fish and salt, pledged by neighbors rather than llama trains from the core. Rotation stays short, 4 months in restless nodes, 6 in quiet ones. So officials do not grow roots deeper than the cords they keep. Tribute schedules read like weather marks. Guayaquil owes 100 baskets of dried fish and 20 of salt each quarter. The baskets are weighed in the courtyard before elders, and the weights are recited as knots settle. Manabí delivers spondylus shells by the basket in high season, when divers work clean water and calmer swell. In return, the storehouse releases highland textiles and emergency maize when currents drive fish offshore. Esmeraldas brings hardwood planks measured by length and thickness for pier work after storms. Tumaco pledges days of skilled labor for channel clearing at the start of the rains. Where goods are light, information becomes part of the pledge. Warnings about shifting sandbars, the first sighting of a current rip, the rumor of a quarrel upriver that might spill into the harbor. The cords hold words as well as weights when a keeper ties a mark for message delivered. Corruption tests the system and teaches it. In the third year at Manabee, a storehouse clerk skims shells from surplus baskets before the posted purchase rate is read. The shortfall appears when Amaru's traveling cord and the local cord meet in public. Two pendant groups fail to match by more than the accepted band. Elders insist on a recount. Baskets are weighed again. The difference stands. The clerk is removed and replaced by his own apprentice. The punishment is not a spectacle, but a re-audit of the last 2 quarters and a repayment plan logged on a fresh cord. The harbor keeps its dignity. The empire keeps its promise that numbers matter more than faces. People remember that the cords do not blink. The coast itself becomes a teacher. An El Niño year swells the rivers and warms the water. Mangroves flood. Sandbars move. Fish scatter. And divers complain of poor visibility. Storehouses built on stone plinths rise above the brown water and stay dry. Vents pull damp air through and out. The tribute shifts for a season without breaking. Fish baskets drop. Salt rises as evaporation pans work overtime. Hardwood deliveries are delayed and replaced by labor days banked for repairs when the water falls. The Maritime Corps shortens legs, waits out bad weeks, and leans on inland rations. The ledger tracks it as a weathermark, not a moral failure. When currents cool and rivers retreat, the pattern writes itself. Because the schedule remembered, the sea could misbehave. The chain reaches into mines as much as along coasts. A young Quipu keeper at Tumbes learns color order by running fingers along cords in the dark. Yellow for grain, white for salt and fish, red for textiles, purple for shells, brown for tools and repairs. He drills decimal places until his hands land on tens and hundreds without looking. On handover day, he stands beside his senior and reads the quarterly counts aloud. The courtyard listens. He hears his own voice steady as elders nod. A woman from a fishing household hears the exact weight of her baskets praised for matching the pledge 3 seasons in a row. She smiles without stepping forward. Reputation becomes a form of currency that cannot be hidden in a wall. Inland, the spine holds. Terraces near Cochabamba expand by measured plots. 50 new steps cut in a winter, 3 more gullies fitted with stone lips to slow runoff. The road crew uses the same bolts of cloth as pay that the coastal crews receive, stamped with marks that travel well. A sunburst within a step diamond for this valley. A paired spiral for that. When a high pass collapses under freeze-thaw, the storehouse upstream releases extra rations to crews pulled from the next rotation. And the loss is logged under a weather knot that auditors know will not be punished. Faith in the cord lets men volunteer for hard weeks without fearing that an honest report will injure their standing. The South keeps its ledger of limits. Mall's watchtowers hold line of sight in winter fog because they were sighted to angles checked on clear days and marked on cords for future crews to reproduce. Patrols stay within 5 days out and back because the storehouse that feeds them can do no more without starving the valley. When a commander asks to push the line, the answer is a number. How many baskets of maize the nearest terraces can spare after seed and household ration? How many llamas can graze without stripping hillsides? How many planks the bridges will need after the next flood? The request dissolves in arithmetic. Resentment has no place to root. The North keeps its honesty. No road is cut into the Darien. Once a year, the Gulf of Urubá sees an exchange that is ceremony and census. Gifts are proportioned to what can be carried without overland folly, tools that fit into a chest, cloth that stacks flat and light. The news sought is not conquest, but currents, storms, fevers. The empire prefers knowledge to flags at the edge, because flags in that jungle would only mark graves. The psychology of safety thickens. People sleep because the storehouse is full and the cords agree. Crews board rafts because they trust the schedule and the repair chest. Headmen meet auditors without dread because last quarter's shortfall was recorded as storm loss and balanced by labor pledges, not by soldiers banging spear butts on doors. Children memorize the quarter days when offerings and inventories meet, and they grow into adults who expect the world to be counted in public. When sickness years cut through the highlands, the chain does not pretend to cure them. It buys time. A harbor that once held 3 months of rations now keeps a widow and her children, fed until her brother's household can absorb them. A village that cannot meet its fish pledge without tearing its nets agrees on a season's deferral and doubles its salt output instead. A keeper who stumbles in mourning at handover is given a second reading without insult. The cords admit grief and make space around it, so that fear does not invent enemies where there are none. By the time the first generation of maritime crews begins to age, the structure feels older than it is. Apprentices rise, legends condense around ordinary competence. The pilot who knew a hidden eddy behind a sandbar, the auditor who could feel a misplaced 10 by the tension in a knot, the headman who brought a surplus to the courtyard rather than hide it. None of these stories inflate the map, they thicken the chain. The empire's reach beyond South America does not look like a color wash. It looks like 5 names said with calm pride: Tumbes, Guayaquil, Manabí, Esmeraldas, Tumaco, and the days between them marked on cords that 2 strangers can read the same way. It looks like storehouses that breathe and bridges that hold, and festivals where the offering table and the counting table stand side by side. It looks like a south that is watched, a north that is respected, and a middle that refuses panic. The road touches the sea returns the favor, and between them, people live by schedules they trust. Quarter by quarter, the ledger tells a story that people can live inside. A standard quarter at full stride begins with 4 rotations out of tumbes. Each rotation fields 40 sailors, 2 rafts per leg, 1 metric ton per raft. 20 tons of rations leave the coastal storehouse across 3 months. Maize flour, chuño, salt for barter, repair cordage counted as tools. Expected loss sits at 3% from spoilage and weather. 19.4 tons reach the latter's beads in measured allotments. The return flow arrives in kind. Guayaquil's dried fish and salt at roughly 6 tons combined. Manabí's spondylus by the basket. Esmeralda's hardwood by length and thickness. Tumaco's pledged labor days for pier and channel work, logged as knots that stand for people rather than weight. The cords close the quarter with variance inside 2%. Anything wider draws a recount, not a raid. Signaling and response stay simple enough to work when fear runs high. The Chasqui relay carries a short cord with 3 pendant groups: place, event, need. A white knot high on the second pendant means pier damage. A brown twist at 10s means repair pins required. A yellow cluster at hundreds means release rations. From harbor to valley and back to harbor, the message crosses in days because no runner is asked to break. Garrison musters mirror the same economy. 10 men to the pier within a quarter hour, 10 more on the path within the hour, 10 held until a second cord confirms the scale. Numbers hold panic down by telling everyone how much is enough. Risk is pooled rather than denied. When a raft founders between Guayaquil and Manabí, the protocol is not punishment, but substitution. The receiving storehouse opens an emergency tier. 5% of food held apart from quarterly flows. Inland, a llama convoy scheduled for textiles draws a different load, and the clerk's cord tags the switch with a looped knot for replacement. Auditors read the quarter, knowing the sea took a bite, and the bite is where the cord says it is. Men stop inventing lies when the truth earns the next issued basket. Prices do not exist in coins here, but scarcity can still whip a coast into fear. The system answers with posted exchange rates in cloth and rations announced at quarter days. 1 shell basket buys 1 bolt in high season, 1.5 in poor water. A hardwood plank of a given size buys 3 bolts or a tool chest lid, but not both. A widow who brings fish knows the rate will be the rate until the next public reading. Headmen who try to hoard for a better deal find their neighbors selling into a stable market and earning trust that cannot be forged. The cords hold fairness because they hold memory. The stores breathe to the pulse of climate. In El Niño years, rivers spread, fish scatter, and rafts shorten their legs. Storehouses built on stone plinths keep grain dry. Vents pull damp air clear of the walls. Pledges shift without shame. Fish baskets drop by a third. Salt rises by half. Hardwood deliveries slide a season and are converted to labor days banked for repairs the moment the waters fall. Inland, terraces release an extra 10% of maize to coastal nodes under a weather knot that binds the favor to be repaid when currents settle. No one mistakes weather for treason. No one mistakes treason for weather. Corruption does not end. It becomes visible. In the 4th year at Guayaquil, a garrison officer colludes with a clerk to double-count salt leaving the storehouse and returning as tribute. The cords disagree by more than the narrow band allowed. Elders insist on a new weighing. The officer is rotated out. The clerk is replaced by his apprentice. The last 2 quarters are reread and repaid in salt at the posted rate across the next season. Phases pass, the ledger remains. The memory that matters is numerical. Religion stitches the numbers into hearts. Quarter days align offerings with audits. People watch their goods move from hand to tally to storage and back out again. Priests bless the exchange. Keepers read the cords. When the last knot is tied, children can recite what their households gave and what the storehouse released. Authority becomes a habit of presence. Absent hands are noticed. Present hands are rewarded with predictability. The sun shrine by the pier does not erase local gods. It reads the same calendar. The ritual anchors the schedule and makes the schedule feel sacred without making it cruel. External threat rarely chooses a convenient hour. When raiders test the pier at Manabí at dusk, the response unfolds as written, not improvised. 10 men form at the storehouse gate with round shields and slings. 10 more take the path above the beach to cut the retreat. The harbor cord with its red pendant for combat stays short. Place, count, outcome. If the raiders flee with 2 baskets, the loss is logged under theft confirmed, a knot the auditors recognize and punish in cloth next quarter by tightening the issue, not by starving the harbor. The point is to make the local headman fight for the ledger because the ledger feeds his people when the sea does not. Neighboring polities learn the math and weigh their choices. A village between beads chooses protectorate status not because the empire looks large, but because the quarter day looks fair. It promises a small tribute, fiber, fruit, labor days, within its capacity and receives cloth and tools at posted rates. It keeps its shrines and its headmen. It accepts an audit because audits keep cousins from cutting each other for advantage. In a world where rumor is the first injury, the cords supply a second opinion that people can touch. Throughput scales by discipline, not by ambition. 2 rafts per leg become 3 in calm seasons, never 5 in storm months. 40 sailors per rotation become 80 only when 2 adjacent storehouses show inventory that can feed them without borrowing from seed stock. Inland, llama convoys to harbors double only after terraces gain measurable steps and bridges are replanked. Command does not shout more. It ties a knot 2 positions higher only when the lower positions have held steady for a year. The South's restraint and the North's honesty protect the middle from leaders who confuse maps with meals. At Mall, requests to push towers forward die under counts of baskets and planks required to hold the new line. In the Darien, pride is checked by humidity and fever that cords have learned to respect. Men with bright ideas are given the audit first, then permission. The idea shrinks to fit the numbers or joins the stories told at night about schemes that ate more than they fed. When sickness strikes again, the chain behaves like a lung. A harbor that once turned inventory twice in a quarter turns it once. A festival that counted tribute in public counts losses with the same voice. Apprentices who trained in shadow step forward. Their hands find tens and hundreds without looking down. Tribute schedules become promises to try. The cords forgive without forgetting. After the burials, the system asks for what can be given and thanks those who meet the floor. People remember that the empire trusted their grief enough to register it. By the 2nd generation, skill matures into culture. Pilots teach eddies and sandbars like family stories. Keepers can feel a misplaced 10 by the tension of a knot and fix it before the courtyard gathers. Young sailors who grew up under the quarter, days think of the sun shrine and the counting table as a single room. Garrison officers come and go, elders remain. The cords give both a language that does not flatter and cannot be bribed. The The shape on a map stays modest. The feeling in a harbor grows large. Tumbes expects its quarter day. Guayaquil expects its weights to match. Manabí expects its surplus to be bought and its divers to come home. Esmeraldas expects planks to become piers that do not fail in the first storm. Tumaco expects tools to return on festival days, clean and counted. Between them, legs measured in days, not dreams, hold because the hands that make them hold believe the next handover will be as fair as the last. This is endurance made from small, repeatable acts, a vent cut right, a knot tied true, a promise kept in front of witnesses. By the third decade, ceilings and buffers are known rather than guessed. 2 knots on the harbor cord set the upper limit for safe departures per week. A third marks the reserve that must never be touched except by public consent. Crews learn to feel the line between discipline and bravado. When wind rises beyond a familiar pitch, the decision to wait is not weakness. It is a rule that kept last year's children fed. Quantities settle into phrases people use in ordinary talk. A pier's worth of hardwood means planks to rebuild 20 paces of decking with 2 spare beams. A basket's mercy means the posted surplus rate paid to a diver whose haul exceeded the pledge. A weather knot means the small twist that excuses a missed delivery, without erasing the obligation to repay when waters calm. Language follows the chords because chords govern the pace at which fear becomes rumor, and rumor becomes flight. Edge management stays modest and exact. At Guayaquil, the garrison drills to form at the storehouse within a quarter hour. Shields front, slings ready, voices low. At Tumaco, pilots drill to guide rafts into mangrove backwaters where swell cannot follow. Watchers keep a tide board marked with carved lines for moon phases and flood heights. The board's notches are copied onto quipu pendants, so flood memory travels upriver and inland. Intelligence is tribute too, a basket of dried fish, a measure of salt, a warning of a shifting bar. Administration refuses to hide behind ceremony. On handover days, chords are compared under sun and witness. If a discrepancy exceeds the accepted band, 2% in quiet seasons, 3 in hard ones, the recount begins at once. Baskets are brought, planks remeasured, shells reweighed. Elders speak for their people, officials answer for their accounts. Reconciliation ends with a repayment plan tied to future issues of cloth or rations, and the names of those responsible are spoken clearly without humiliation. The public learns that truth costs less than pride. The inland spine holds its part of the covenant. Terrace steps extend by counted cuts. Drains are cleared on schedule. Bridges are replanked before the flood, not after it. Each valley knows how many convoys it can feed without cutting into seed. Each pass has a cord pendant for snow weeks that not even ambition can move. When a road collapses, a storehouse upstream opens the emergency tier with a ceremony as sober as a funeral. Men return to work because the rations were ready before the apology. The chain absorbs new places only when they can be named to fit. A cove halfway between Guayaquil and Manabí joins as a rest inlet, not a protectorate. The commitment is small: a shelter for crews, a cistern kept clean, a promise to signal squalls with a reed fire at dusk. In return, the storehouse grants tools, a pair of bolts each quarter, and the presence of authority in the form of audits that end arguments before blood answers. Where a village asks for more than it can carry, the answer is a number. Where it asks for less, the answer is the posted rate for what it truly has. Scarcity visits without knocking. A poor harvest inland lowers storehouse thresholds. The cords adjust targets downward, and the quarter day becomes a day of redistribution rather than demand. Guayaquil's fish and salt swell the garrison ration to protect inland fields. Manabí's shells buy more cloth to keep coastal households from selling tools. The chain flexes because the nodes remember that the road feeds the harbor, and the harbor feeds the road. No one pretends that cloth can be eaten. No one forgets that a full stomach buys peace better than a slogan. The psychology of fairness grows thicker than fear. Households arrive early on quarter days because they trust the rate will be what was spoken last season. Headmen settle border spats with the presence of a cord rather than a spear. Boys who once fought over who would carry a shield now brag about how quickly they can read a 100-knot pendant. Girls learn to measure baskets and call out weights before elders with voices that do not tremble. Skill, visible, public, repeatable, becomes a badge of belonging stronger than paint or tattoo. When misfortune takes a beloved keeper, the system shows its depth. Apprentices step into light. Their hands find tens and hundreds because they learned by touch in the dark. A moment of silence spreads across the courtyard before the reading begins, and then the voice steadies, and then the numbers flow, and then the storehouse doors open, and life continues. Grief is written into the cord with a small memorial knot at the time pendant, a mark that will survive longer than tears. Across seasons, the sea teaches humility and precision. Crews memorize coves where swells lose their anger. They learn how a glossy slick on brown water marks a current edge that will carry them north for an hour at no cost. They record where a fallen tree has made a temporary snag that only a fool would try to pass on a falling tide. Those notes become knots. Those knots become the difference between a safe return and a tale told in the past tense. The frontier to the south remains disciplined. Mall's watchtowers talk in light on clear nights and in drum on fogged ones. Patrol loops stay inside the 5-day rule. Failures are measured in planks and baskets, not dressed as honor. Success is invisible, a season without a bridge collapse, a quarter without a requisition that touched seed grain. At year's end, the chords from each tower are read together so the line becomes a single story and not a set of lonely fears. The Darien remains a truth that keeps pride in its place. The annual visit to the Gulf is a ritual of enough. Tools are gifted that fit a chest. Cloth is exchanged that fits a pack. News is asked for that fits a plan. No one carves a road into the swamp. No one pretends that a rope of knots will hold a column together, where fever unwinds men faster than courage can tie them back. Respect is policy. By the time children who watch the first quarter days have children of their own, the chain has become ordinary. Ordinary is the goal. Ordinary means crews launch on time or wait for wind with patience, because both choices are written. Ordinary means an audit reads like an old song everyone knows the words to. Ordinary means a missing basket is a weather knot, not a quarrel. Ordinary is how empires last without becoming monsters. The final shape is simple enough to describe without a map. A spine of roads holds the Andes and feeds valleys to the coast. At the coast, 5 names anchor a ladder north: Tumbes, Guayaquil, Manabí, Esmeraldas, Tumaco. Between each, days of water at 2 knots when the wind is kind, with rest and repair counted as part of the trip, not as failure. At the southern edge, Mall stands as a measured limit that saves more lives than a victory would cost. At the northern edge, the Darien stands as a respected refusal. What changes from the world as it was is small and disciplined. Sailors already living by the sea are scheduled and paid under the same mitah that lays roads. Storehouses already keeping valleys alive are planted above tidal lines and stocked with the same logic. Rule already organized by tens and hundreds narrows to ports and pledges instead of grasping at regions and resentment. Each change answers a bottleneck that had a name: transport capacity, provisioning, honesty at the edge. What endures is not a banner flapping over distant jungles. It is a rhythm, rations issued and received, tribute pledged and bought, losses admitted and forgiven, repairs made before blame is sought. The sun shrine and the counting table sharing a day so memory cannot be bent in the dark. People who expect tomorrow to look like the best parts of today because the chords have matched for years. If you enjoy rigorous, no-hype alternate history, subscribe to What If Wars.